And now for that major breaking news that we've been following all morning. Sources confirming to CBS News New York Mayor Eric Adams being indicted following a federal investigation. Marks the first time in New York City's history a sitting mayor has been charged. Now, there's still a lot of information yet to come out. We're going to expect to learn much more today, but here's what we know so far. The indictment remains sealed, so it's still unclear exactly what charges Adams will face. In a video statement last night, Adams called these statements false and based on lies. If he does choose to stay in his position, Governor Hochul does have the ability to remove him from office if she should choose to do so. Natalie Dudridge has been live outside Gracie Mansion all morning long, and there has been a flurry of activity there. So let's get right to Natalie and see what things are like now.
Yes, Chris, that's right. Keeping my eye here on the mayor's residence, Gracie Mansion. In the last couple minutes, we saw another black SUV with tinted windows pull out. We have seen vehicles in and out all morning. So I'll give you a sense of the scene here. We obviously have the media behind the barricade there, photographers as well. We're seeing NYPD and the mayor's detail. And as you mentioned, a source familiar with the investigation telling us the FBI and other law enforcement are indeed at Gracie Mansion. A source telling us a federal indictment containing charges against New York City Mayor Adams is expected to be unsealed today. Now, also, in about the last 30 minutes, we heard from the mayor's attorney, Alex Spiro. He said in a statement, federal agents appeared this morning at Gracie Mansion in an effort to create a spectacle again and take Mayor Adams' phone again. He has not been arrested and looks forward to his day in court. And Spiro adding, they sent a dozen agents to pick up a phone when we would have happily turned it in. Again, that's a statement from the mayor's attorney. So how did we get here? Well, this all comes after several investigations into the mayor as well as members of his administration. This started last November. The indictment, as you said, remains sealed, so still unclear what charges Adams will face. Earlier this week, Adams was asked if he was going to resign. He rejected that idea and says he is looking forward to running for re-election. And he responded through a video message taped here at Gracie Mansion last night. Here's what he had to say.
My fellow New Yorkers, it is now my belief that the federal government intends to charge me with crimes. If so, these charges will be entirely false, based on lies. But they would not be surprising. I always knew that if I stood my ground for all of you, that I would be a target, and a target I became. For months, leaks and rumors have been aimed at me in an attempt to undermine my credibility and paint me as guilty.
Last night, the former chief of staff to the mayor left Gracie Mansion. CBS was here. Reporters were asking questions. It's a little hard to hear, but take a listen.
What's going on? What can you tell us?
Do you know if the mayor, it's a sad day for the mayor and for the city?
What are you telling him to do that?
So what happens next? Well, first off, we reached out to Governor Hochul's office. Her office says she is aware of these concerning news reports and is monitoring the situation, adding it would be premature to comment further until the matter is confirmed by law enforcement. Experts telling us Governor Hochul does have the ability to remove Adams from office. And our political reporter Marcia Kramer says there will be pressure on Hochul to do so because the mayor has many positions to fill due to these recent resignations, and he may have a hard time filling them due to this ongoing situation. If Adams were to resign or be removed by the governor, public advocate Jumaane Williams would then take over on an interim basis and would have 3 days to call for a special election that would have to be held within 80 days. So summarize, how do we get here? Federal authorities, they scrutinized donations to Adams' 2021 mayoral campaign from people connected to the Turkish government. Sources say then a new round of subpoenas were delivered to Adams' lawyer in July, seeking information related to dealings with Israel, China, Qatar, South Korea, and Uzbekistan. Other federal investigations underway include into former NYPD Commissioner Edward Caban, who since resigned, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety Philip Banks, his brother, Schools Chancellor David Banks, who has since announced his retirement, though he insists he planned on retiring prior to these investigations, as well as First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright. So we are here outside Gracie Mansion, keeping our eye out for for the mayor, who we have not yet seen in person since the indictment was announced. And the mayor's attorney, once again, saying the mayor has not been arrested and that he looks forward to his day in court. And that's the latest here from the Upper East Side. Natalie Duddridge, CBS News New York.
All right, Natalie, thank you. A lot to unpack right there. We're joined now by our political reporter, who Natalie mentioned a number of times, Marcia Kramer. Marcia, let's start with this. The mayor quoted as saying, "I will fight these injustices with every ounce of my strength and my spirit." He's going to need a lot of both, considering what we just listened to with Natalie Duddridge right there. You've seen this before. Maybe not to this degree. Does he have to resign?
He doesn't. Under the Constitution of the city and the state of New York, he does not have to resign, and but the mayor is going to try to fight this. The question is, even though he doesn't have to resign, does the pressure mount for him to do so? And what's going to happen here is going to be very important to see what Chuck Schumer says, what Hakeem Jeffries says, and what the governor says. And the truth, the thing that I think is sort of not amusing but ironic, is that he used to call himself the Biden of Brooklyn. Yeah. And as you know, President Biden was pushed out of office, begged to step aside so that the Democrats would have a better chance of winning. So is
by
this going to be
Democratic allies?
Is the Biden of Brooklyn, i.e. the mayor, going to be pushed out in the same way that Joe Biden was, just because the politics becomes too difficult for him to cope with?
Hakeem Jeffries, who you mentioned, did come out in support last night. We're not sure if that has changed at all. Exactly. We'll see today if that's changed once this indictment is unsealed. And when I said, does he have to step down, I know it's not legally he's got to step down, but just with all of the mounting pressure, with all of the decisions he now needs to make, you know, with all of the people in his administration that have stepped down within the last 2 weeks or so, other decisions that are going to come down the pike, is it in the city's best interests?
Well, it's going to be up for him to decide what's in the city's best interest and in his own best interest. I can tell you this, that over the course of the last several months, and especially this past week, he has argued that despite the probe, which began in November, he has continued to do his job as mayor. He points out to dramatic drops in crime, to tourism being up, to new jobs being created, all the while he and members of his administration were being investigated. So he's going to argue that he can do the job. The question is this: now that he's been indicted, how will he find other people to find these openings that have been created? You know, the health commissioner resigned. Sure. He's looking for a permanent police commissioner. General
counsel, all of these things. Who's going to want to sign on, not knowing what's really ahead? Therein lies the problem. We talk about Governor Hochul being able to actually remove him if she so chooses to do so. Does she look at the bigger picture and say, you know what, there are too many big decisions that he's going to have to make? Do I trust him now that he's under indictment to make these decisions long term?
Well, you know, they've had a good relationship, so it's hard to know. But also, the governor's going to look at the political considerations for her own re-election campaign. And the question is, does she want to remove the second black governor of the black mayor of New York City when she has to run, and she's going to need those outer borough minority voters who support him still to back her campaign? It's a political calculus. It's going to be a delicate balancing act.
And let's say, I know we mentioned that Jumaane Williams would step in if he does resign or is asked to step aside. Jumaane Williams would step in. There would be a special election. What does a special election look like for this?
Well, a special election is nonpartisan. So people just run, and there's no party designation. They don't have to say Republican or Democrat. And ranked choice voting is applied. So it would be ranked choice voting. Once the winner is declared, that's it. But the thing about it is they have to be careful in scheduling it, because it's also in the middle of a campaign for the next term for mayor, and they have to make sure it doesn't conflict with the primary, which I think is going to be in June of 2026.
So let's talk about the investigation with Mayor Adams as it relates to the Turkish government, his connections with them, and that really kind of beginning this investigation over the course of the last year. What more can you tell us about that, or what this potential indictment could be when we see it?
Well, I mean, what we know, and you know, we have to wait until the indictment is sealed, but what we know from the subpoenas that were served was that they were looking at the relationship between campaign donations that came from Turkey and sometimes straw donors from a construction company in Brooklyn that might have been given to the mayor's campaign in exchange for pressure exerted on the fire department to approve a building building permit so that a new Turkish consulate in Midtown Manhattan could open. He was also very close to the then Consul General. There are pictures with him together. And he, the Consul General, his name was Reyhan Ozgar, he was named in the subpoena. So it's possible that they talked to this man and they asked him those questions. Now, we know that one of the people whose houses were raided, Rina Abasoba, who was his liaison to the Turkish community, is cooperating with federal prosecutors.
Does Mayor Adams sit back and say to himself, okay, the walls feel like they're closing in. You've got one person after the next that is he. Now, Edward Caban, the police commissioner, is stepping down. I don't know if that was necessarily related to the storm surrounding the mayor. Obviously, he's got his own issues to deal with his brother. But the court of public opinion, and when you've got the people of New York and New York City seeing all these people that are kind of running for cover, you've got this indictment, this cloud of controversy. What does it really speak to, if the mayor can still effectively execute his job as mayor of this city, whether he feels he can do it or not?
There's been a crescendo of people demanding that he step aside. I mean, my email box is filled this morning, and it's early in the morning, with people saying he has to step aside. But he has argued that people have asked him to step aside since the day he took the oath of office in 2022. So he's going to dig in. How long he can dig his heels in remains to be seen.
The overarching thing, and we talked about with Professor Sample about this morning, the overarching thing. So you look at this, and obviously if this indictment has the potential to be very damning and very damaging for him. But then you look big picture, national politics. You've got a man who's leading one party that's running for president of the United States, who's not only been indicted but convicted, and his base, his following does not seem to stray from. So what does this mayor now look at that and say to himself, well, hey, if he's not stepping down, and if he's not being told by all of his constituents and all of the other Republicans in New York, whether it's Elise Stefanik or some of the Republicans on Long Island to step aside, I mean, why should I?
I mean, he's been convicted, just for the record. Donald Trump was convicted. I mean, Eric Adams has not been convicted of anything, so he could point to that as an example of, like, I want to clear my name, and I'm going to do it while I'm in office. I mean, his statement last night and his video last night were very, very strong, and I think that he's going to dig his heels in. And that's why, at least for the short term.
Exactly. That's why your inbox full of all those people saying he should resign, probably need to kind of sit back and let this
some of them want his office. Well, let's cut to the chase on that.
It's amazing how everyone's got a motivation in this whole political thing.
Well, it is politics.
Shocking. Very shocking. Marcia, thank you. Really great to sit with you all the time, and we really appreciate your insight here. We're going to hear more from Marcia, of course, throughout the course of the day, especially when we find out what exactly this indictment is, when it is unsealed at some point today. Stay with CBS News New York as we continue to cover this historic indictment, which is going to happen at any time. You can find all of our coverage at cbsnewyork.com, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.